Hey everyone, before we dive in, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel grow, and I appreciate every single one of you. I never imagined that a single angry comment could completely wipe someone out of your world. But that's exactly what one thoughtless remark did. My name is Sarah, and up until last winter, I truly thought my marriage was solid. A bit faded maybe, but David and I had been a couple for 12 years, married for 9. He was the quiet, reliable type, the guy who fixed problems rather than talking about emotions. I always said that his steady nature was what I loved most about him. But over time I began to hold it against him. The evening everything changed was totally normal. Bills stacked on the table, dishes drying in the rack, the TV humming softly in the background. David got home late from the auto shop, hands stained with grease, looking exhausted. He told me his boss had mocked him right in front of the other guys. I hardly glanced up from my phone. I was fed up with always carrying the conversations, worn out by what I saw as his lack of initiative. When he let out a sigh and said he felt overlooked at work, something bitter bubbled up inside me. I told him he needed to speak up for himself. He replied that he had tried. I let out a quick, harsh laugh and said maybe he just didn't have what it took to earn respect. Those words hit harder than I intended, but I didn't stop. I told him he had no spine, no ambition, no real presence. I pointed out that other husbands didn't let people walk all over them. I said things I'll never be able to unsay. David didn't yell back. He didn't argue. He just froze like a light had been switched off inside him. He walked right past me without saying anything and closed the door to the guest room. I figured he just needed some time alone. The next morning he left before dawn. That night he came home, made dinner, and ate it standing at the counter with his back turned to me. When I asked what he wanted to discuss, he said nothing. He stopped looking me in the eye. If I walked into a room, he'd find an excuse to leave. It felt like sharing a home with someone who knew every detail about me, but acted like a total stranger. Days stretched into weeks. He kept up with the chores, the shopping, the daily routines, but he completely removed himself from any connection with me. When I tried to say sorry, he told me he'd heard me, then turned away. I started paying attention to all the little things I'd overlooked before. How he always checked the doors were locked at night. How he'd warm up the car for me on cold mornings. How he used to grab my hand in crowded places. All of it vanished, quietly taken away. I convinced myself he was trying to punish me. I told myself he was blowing it out of proportion. But every effort to get a reaction out of him fell flat. Anger would have been simpler to deal with. His silence was clean and precise like a cut. One night, I followed him out to the garage and stood between him and his workbench. I asked if he even loved me anymore. He stared at the wall just over my shoulder and said, "Love can't survive contempt." Then he grabbed his tools and stepped around me as if I wasn't standing there. That's when real fear hit me. I understood I'd struck at something vulnerable and deeply personal. Something most men keep hidden. I'd ridiculed a part of him that already felt inadequate. I kept replaying that night in my mind, desperately wishing I could take the words back. I left little notes around the house. I made his favorite dinners. I cried in private. Nothing reached him. Things came to a head when my sister came over and picked up on the tension right away. She pulled me aside and asked what I'd done. When I explained, she went silent for a moment. Then she said, "Guys can forgive a lot, but being humiliated hurts worse than any fight." That same night, I found an envelope on the kitchen table with my name on it. Inside was one page in David's neat handwriting. He wrote that he wasn't moving out yet, but he was finished letting me define him. He needed space to figure out who he was without my criticism echoing in his head. I sank to the floor and finally got it. My words hadn't just wounded him, they changed our entire marriage. And I had no idea if we could ever fix it. I ended up sleeping on the couch, listening to him move around the house in patterns I no longer understood. Every step was a reminder that hurt doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it's exact, lasting, and entirely your own doing. I waited in grief, hoping for forgiveness, but the man who couldn't bring himself to look at me had already checked out emotionally long before I was ready to face the reality. The sadness settled in without any comfort. David went about his days with the same calm routine, showering, getting dressed, making coffee, never once meeting my gaze. I watched him from doorways like an unwelcome visitor. When the front door shut behind him, the quiet felt even heavier. I finally saw that I'd mistaken his distance for meanness. It wasn't. It was him protecting himself. I called out of work that day and sat by myself, facing truths I'd dodged for years. I'd wanted David to be louder, more outgoing, more forceful, but I'd never bothered to ask why he wasn't that way. I'd compared him to snippets of other men, their confident grins and outward toughness, ignoring whatever struggles they hid. In the process, I turned a man who'd loved me faithfully into a stereotype, then tore it down. That harshness was all mine. By the third day, the whole house seemed to judge me. Every item held a memory. The jacket he'd drape over my chair, the coffee mug he'd picked out because it reminded him of a vacation we'd shared, the wobbly screw he'd meant to fix. I realized contempt doesn't show up overnight. It builds slowly, nourished by frustration and unfair comparisons, until it spills out as words, and once it's out, it reshapes everything around it. When David got home that evening, I didn't block him or push for a talk. I simply asked if we could sit down together, and if he said no, I'd accept it. He paused, then gave a small nod. We sat at opposite ends of the sofa, a wide gap between us like a boundary line. I told him I now understood I'd attacked his sense of worth, not just his actions. I said I felt deep shame. I didn't beg for forgiveness. I admitted I had no right to expect it. He listened all the way through without cutting in. When I was done, he took a deep breath and finally looked straight at me. His eyes weren't full of rage, they were just weary. He said he'd spent weeks with my words looping in his mind, at work, in the car, in quiet moments alone. The worst part wasn't the insult itself, but realizing I viewed him exactly how he'd always feared people might. Weak and disposable. Something in him shut down that night to safeguard whatever pride he had left. I asked what he needed. He said he wanted to rebuild his own confidence before trying to rebuild us. He needed counseling, room to breathe, time, and total honesty, even when it was hard. He said if we kept going, it would be slower, calmer, and on new ground. I said yes, knowing that agreement didn't promise we'd make it. The weeks after that were eye-opening. David began therapy. He opened up more to his counselor than he'd ever done with me. I learned to really listen without jumping in to fix or rephrase his feelings to make them easier for me. Some nights he slept next to me. Others he didn't. I quit tracking progress by big gestures and started measuring it by growing trust. One evening, months down the line, we went to a casual get-together. Someone cracked a joke at David's expense. Before I could say anything, David handled it calmly. No outburst, no show of force, just quiet strength. I saw something steady return to him, something I'd never destroyed, just covered up. On the drive home, he reached over and took my hand. It wasn't full forgiveness. It was permission to try again. I get it now. Being a man isn't about being loud or in charge. It's about staying true under stress, bouncing back after pain, and having the strength to step away from disdain, even when it's from the person you love most. David faced his own healing when he stopped facing me. That space made me face myself too. There were rough patches, days when he pulled back again, when quiet returned and worry came with it. I learned not to chase constant proof of love. I learned that healing isn't a show, and regret isn't dramatic. It's steady. It appears every day without needing recognition. That understanding changed me more than any sorry ever could. Growth doesn't undo the damage, but it can create something stronger over it. I carry that knowledge now, aware that love only lasts where respect is guarded. And guarding it starts with self-control, humility, and the readiness to examine yourself before asking anything of someone else.